There comes a point in pretty much every build where eventually it dawns on you that you're a lot closer to firing it up for the first time than you ever realized prior, and I think this is that moment for me. We've got a few parts to make and a few parts to install in this episode, but we're going to wrap it up by making a final checklist of what we need in order to light this thing off, and I think that's dangerously close to happening. I am beyond excited for it. This will be a monumental moment for me. But before we get there, we've got to weld up the exhaust and the gas filler neck, and I want to talk about some of what has worked out really well for me because I'm an amateur TIG welder at best, and I'm really happy with how they turned out. We've got to install them on the car, and we've got to make some hoses. So let's get all that stuff done and then figure out the last few things that we need in order to make this thing run.
In the last episode, we got the exhaust system all tacked together, both the downpipe for the turbo and the screamer pipe for the wastegate, and now we need to finish weld it. That process is going to start with cleanup. We're going to Scotch-Brite the entire exhaust system so that we get a nice, smooth finish on our stainless steel. While we can do this at any point, if we go back and do it after we've welded it up, we'll lose all the pretty color we put into it. We're also going to be back purging the exhaust, which means sealing it off and filling it up with argon thanks to this double-ended regulator. We're going to do this to prevent what's called sugaring or contamination on the backside of the weld. In an effort to dial in the weld settings and get my bearings about me, I did some test welds on the pie cuts that I showed off in the last episode. And while this was helpful in making sure I knew what I was doing, it's also a good chance to show you exactly what sugaring is, because the backside of this weld is exposed to oxygen. If you look inside the tube, you'll see some crusty black oxidization on the inside of the weld. And while this isn't hugely consequential, it can weaken things, and we don't want it. So we're going to prevent it by pumping argon into the exhaust as we weld it. I've got a hose running from that double-sided regulator up through the table, and I've got the exhaust sealed off with foil, the cheap and easy way to do this. They do make nice cups for this, but I don't own any, and I'm probably not good enough to utilize them. On the note of shielding gas, I'm also going to be using a big cup while we're welding this. We want to make sure the weld is not exposed to oxygen until it has cooled off sufficiently. So I'm going to be using this Furic MK14, which has a nice big gas lens and should do the trick. Last but not least, before we burn it in, we want to get some acetone on a rag and clean every fingerprint off of the surface. Any oils we leave behind near the welds will be baked in permanently. And although we're going to coat this exhaust, I'll know it's there, and that'll bug me. My test welds confirmed that I should use the rule of thumb of 1 amp per thousandth, and it's officially time to burn this thing in. I've only ever welded stainless exhaust like this once before, and I've only welded stainless twice. So I was pretty nervous going into this that I would absolutely cook the material. That's what happened when I tried to fix the exhaust on the E30M3 in a previous episode. Although the welds just turned out gray and ugly. This time though, I definitely felt more confident going in. I've been practicing with this TIG welder a lot lately, and I felt more confident than ever. And with each weld that I accomplished on this exhaust system, I felt better and better as I went along. It took me probably an hour and a half to get everything welded to completion, but it was probably the most fun 90 minutes I've spent with a welding torch. There were a couple of gaps to contend with on the turbo side of the exhaust where the bends meet in the middle of bends, and that's typically where the bends are not perfectly round, but even still, I tackled those without any issues as well. In fact, I'd say there wasn't a single place on this exhaust system that I'm unhappy with. The only criticism I could make is that I should probably have a little bit less color, but even then, I'm stoked. Honestly, for the longest time, I thought I might never get the hang of TIG welding, and I'm not saying I have the hang of it yet, but I'm getting the hang of it. Every time I sit down at the welding bench, I feel like I get better. I see improvement, and I know that'll slow down over time as I do get better. But for anybody out there struggling with TIG welding, stick with it. This is absolutely the most fun I have had with welding as a whole. I am so glad to see the improvement happening here. This is fun. I need to make some more stainless stuff. I gotta keep going. So let's actually take a look at what I did. Now, as said, this isn't perfect, but I am happy with it. I think it came out really good, especially for my first time doing something quite like this. The welds all have a pretty nice and low profile, the insides of all the tubing looks really good and is contamination free, and I'm really happy that I didn't warp the V-band flanges when I welded them on. Overall, I should probably aim for less color in the welds, as a light straw finish is ideal, and technically color means oxidization in the weld, but I'm happy with it, and if we look inside of this stuff, there's no contamination, so to speak, so I'm leaving this, and I'm happy about it. So let's get this stuff installed on the car and see what it actually looks like now that it's finished.
So I know it's not perfect, but I'm genuinely happy with how the exhaust came out. From a quality perspective and the way that it looks, I think it should sound pretty good, especially when that screamer pipe opens. All in all, I think this is one of my favorite parts of the car so far. I've really got to decide what I'm gonna do with that back mesh to kind of complete the back end of this thing. I will say though, I do think for the other turbo setup, I want to redo this exhaust and make it out of titanium for that weight savings on the setup that's going to be on track. I think we can save a lot of weight between that turbo and the exhaust. Not that there's much here, but titanium is incredibly lightweight. I'll also say that now that I've gotten better, I really want to redo that turbo manifold. So for the other turbo, I may just take the opportunity and do it. Instead of building an adapter, why not just make a second manifold and continue this practice of skills and just make the best thing that I can? So I think that's what I'll do. That'll be later though. We got to get the car running first.
In keeping progress up with the TIG welder, I decided to go on and finish weld the gas filler neck, and although it's aluminum, I decided I'd give it my best effort, because worst case scenario, no one will be able to see this thing, even if I do a poor job on it. But honestly, it didn't turn out too bad. There are some welds that aren't so great, but there are plenty that are, well, they're fine. I'm getting better with this aluminum thing, and I'm enjoying the challenge of it. I did make a couple of modifications to it while I had it out of the car so that I could get that gas door cap to close effectively. It was the one change I needed to make from the last time you saw this thing. But it worked out, and I like the way that it sits. It hides nicely behind the oil tank, and the welds that you can see aren't the worst in the world.
So the only other thing that I think this needs is some sort of grounding strap so that we don't have a spark situation and blow the car up. And I need to get another flappy paint protector thing, car diaper, I don't know what to call it. I thought about stealing the one off of John's car, but it's really not in much better shape. So we'll make a new one or buy a new one. And for those curious, I know you keep seeing this in the background. No, it's not my car, it belongs to my buddy John. I do not have two Ferrari kind of money. I honestly don't even really have one Ferrari kind of money. That's why it has a Honda motor in it.
I decided I'd go on and put the turbo and the charge air system back in the car to make sure that it does clear the exhaust piping, and indeed it does. I say this every time we make a change back here, but I'm really happy with the way that this engine bay is shaping up, and as it continues to fill up, it looks better and better. The last thing on our list for today is to make the oil lines for our relocated oil filter housing. And you guys have seen me do this plenty of times, so I won't walk you through the process, but I do have one tip. And that's if you forget to put the hose end on before you flare the steel braiding out, well, there is a solution. My answer is to wrap the end in tape and attempt to press the hose end on over the flared end. That is, at least give it your best effort, and then eventually give up and go over and find your hose cutters, and cut the end off, and start all over. At least that's what I did. With those two hoses done, we are nearly finished with the plumbing of the car. There's only a couple left, and they're not hugely consequential at the moment.
All right, so at this point, what do we need to actually fire this engine up? It's a relatively short list. There's a couple different categories. The first is parts. I need to get an O2 sensor port or bung installed on this thing and order up an O2 sensor. I also need fuel injectors and spark plugs. Now, as far as fuel injectors go, I've really been delaying, trying to decide what fuel I want to run in this car. I have officially decided I'm going to try running race gas in it first, and if I can't keep it cool, I'll move to E85. But I think race gas sounds like the easier solution, so I'm going to go with that. As far as fabrication goes, most stuff at this point is wrapped up. We've got to do a little bit more welding on the charge piping. We don't need things like the water tanks on the intercooler. We don't need the cooling system totally wrapped up. That's not necessary to start it up. We also don't need an intake on the turbo. The biggest job left is I got to pull the engine back out and put the clutch, flywheel, and starter in it. It's not really doable in the car, I don't think. Maybe it is, but I might as well pull it out. There's probably some things I want to weld while it's out. Honestly, if I really tried, we could probably have this thing running at the end of next week. That's not out of the realm of possibility. The big hang up past that is I am waiting on the body harness from Ryan at Rywire, and I'm not gonna rush him on that. And I'm also not in a rush to start this thing. I wanna take my time, make sure I don't mess anything up. There's a lot of money on the line here. Rushing the first start could be problematic. But I'm excited. That list is short. We are getting there. Is it gonna happen next week? No, but it's gonna happen soon. I promise you that. I'm motivated to get this done. With that said, I think over the weekend, I'm gonna hop on the Model A, try to get some of that chassis put back together. It's so close to being done, it'd be nice to just cross that off the list. And if that's done, I can show you guys the new project car. I won't feel as shameful about introducing another project. So I'm gonna see what I can get done over the weekend on that. We'll be back on the Ferrari at the end of the week, and we'll see how far we get. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Subscribe if you haven't. Not only does it help me out, you'll want to be here when we actually start this thing. And we are getting close. I just described everything we need in like 30 seconds. So do that, hit the comments, likes, all that stuff. It helps me out. I'll catch you guys next week, and thank you as always for the support.